Good morning. My name is Julie Samuel Westman, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone, those that are with us here on the Zoom call and those that are joining us via Facebook Live. We are Kansas City Oasis, and we're a secular humanist community that feels like the human experience is better when it's shared, and we're so pleased that you've chosen to share your time with us this morning in the middle of whichever number snowpocalypse it is this winter. Too many, as far as I'm concerned. Um, I've lived in the Midwest 25 years, and every year I'm still surprised when I wake up and I'm like, oh, this is happening. And it's especially, cold and chilly. So hopefully everyone is somewhere nice and warm this morning and thinking warm thoughts. So we gather here around our 5 values, which are people are more important than beliefs, meaning comes from making a difference, human hands solve human problems, reality is known through reason, and be accepting and be accepted. We're excited with the program that we have to share with you this morning. Our musical guest is Amber Martin. We have a community moment by our very own Jocelyn Rose, and then our featured speaker is from MOCSA, that we're big fans and supporters of. That will be Kelsey, that will be joining us from MOCSA. So without any further ado, though, we're going to turn it over to Amber for her first performance this morning. Welcome, Amber.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to start with a song I wrote about COVID and not being able to see my family for the first few months. And well, here it goes. Morning dove in the window, please let us all go, please let us all go. times in life to get where you're going. I know that you'll show them that you're a beautiful light. All right, that was the first one. So now I can actually see my little baby niece. But in the beginning of COVID, I couldn't even go over there, so I kind of got sad and wrote that song. So here's a song I wrote. It's called Honey Eyes. The last song was called Morning Dove. Honey eyes, but honey, I can't seem to figure out why loving never comes my way. When it does, it screams and it shouts. I can't connect with anyone around here. I seem to connect better when I hit steer. My world is turning, my wheels are burning. If I knew now what I knew then, well, I haven't quite figured it out yet. We're all just trying to get back, trading in a borrowed time. In the morning we both wake up like the sun will rise and shine, yeah. Like the sun will rise and shine, yeah. There'll be better times in my mind. I've got honey eyes, but honey, I can't seem to figure out why loving never comes my way. And when it does, it screams and it shouts. I can't connect with anyone around here. I seem to connect better when I have to steer. The world is turning, my wheels are burning. If I knew now what I knew then, well, I guess I haven't figured it out yet. We're all just trying to get back, trading in a borrowed time. In the morning we'll both wake up like the sun will rise and shine, yeah. Like the sun will rise and shine, yeah. There'll be better times in my mind.
Gosh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. What a way to kick off our program this morning. So you might see in the chat, but for those of you that are joining us on Facebook Live, you can hear more from Amber at Amber Lynn Martin Music on Facebook. It looks like you've been doing some live streaming, and I see from a slight little bit of Facebook stalking that you have a new album coming out. So maybe after the break we can talk about that. Okay, that's
Yes.
great. We're really looking forward to hearing you a couple more times this morning. So thank you for joining us. All right. So first, we'll start off with a few announcements this morning. Um, if you've looked in our private page, you can see that we still have a drive going on via Amazon wish list, so contactless drive in support of Micah Ministries. As I talked a little bit about at the front of our program, it's real cold out there, guys, and it's likely to stay that way. We know that we have a lot of houseless folks in our community that could use a helping hand, and this is one way we can do that. If you have the means and the ability to do so, go over to our private Facebook page, and you'll see a link to the Amazon wish list, or you can contact Sally Minden for more details on that. Now we'll talk about a few celebrations. My, again, Facebook has told me that Barbara Janie Miller will celebrate her birthday on this coming Friday. And we missed this last week, but Cheryl Brissett and Mark Dixon welcomed a new granddaughter, Parker May, on January 30th, and she is gorgeous and has a ton of hair. And yeah, she is just as cute as a bug there. So we're super excited. That's their first grandbaby. Another super exciting thing that has happened that you might have seen or heard, Julie Randolph and Will Manning, two members of our community that most of us know and love, got engaged. So we have a wedding to look forward to. Maybe not us in person, but we will celebrate them virtually, and then, hopefully once all this craziness ends, we'll get to have an in-person celebration. But our hearts and love go out to Julie and Will this morning. You might have also seen on our Facebook page that we have a meal train underway in support of Rose Flower and her family after a sudden loss in their family. We appreciate everyone who has already donated meals and funds to assist them. If that's something you would still like to do, there's still a sign up available for that on the private page, and you can contact me for that if you have any questions. And always as a reminder, if you have a celebration that you'd like to share, please let one of the MCs or one of the board members know. We are here to celebrate, share, grieve, laugh, cry together, apart during the pandemic. If you have anything you'd like to share, please pass it along, because we're here to, try to keep our community together until we're in person again. So with that, we will move into our community moment. For those of you that haven't joined us before, a community moment is a time where someone from our community can share a little bit about their journey, something they're passionate about, something that they're interested in, just really anything that speaks to them and helps us to get to know them better. This week we have a returning community moment presenter, Jocelyn Rose. We asked her for 3 words to describe herself, and she said sincere, passionate, and creative. And if she had a warning label, what would it be? And it is: this koala-like person loves deeply, hugs intensely, naps frequently, and requires food, meds, and lots of cuddles. She's whiskey in a teacup. And I think we're going to be talking about singing, something we also have enjoyed in getting to know Jocelyn Rose. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jocelyn.
Hi there. Okay. Nikki, would you mind helping me with the PowerPoint? Thank you. Okay, so a little bit about my singing background. I started singing when I was little. Singing is what I love to do more than anything in the world. I was a member of Elite Choir International, and we traveled a bit, and I loved that. I was invited to sing at Carnegie Hall. I've performed for American Royal and sort of performed with my own group all over the country, and I really loved it. MS has affected my vocal cords, so it's a little bit different now, but I still really love singing, and that's all that really matters. Sorry, I just hit the phone with my foot. Anyway, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so basics, things that are really important. Go to the next slide. The most important things to start with are posture. Oh, yeah, we're going to identify what we're working with first. Okay, so singing is done mostly with the hard palate, the soft palate, and the diaphragm. And I just want to sort of see, this is a group participation thing. So later on, you guys are coming off of mute and it's going to be so much fun. If you guys know where your diaphragm is, or your hard palate or soft palate, could you just do one of those raise your hand button things? Woohoo! Awesome. Okay, so a good trick is to find where your last rib is, and then slide your fingers over, and you'll hit your diaphragm. So everybody put your fingers on your diaphragm, please. And I want you to take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. Okay, you should feel your diaphragm expanding outward and then obviously retracting. Your shoulders should stay level to the ground. Now your hard palate is the roof of your mouth. It's the bit that you always burn on coffee. And then your soft palate is back here. And when you yawn, so I'm going to try to yawn so I can trick you all into yawning. And actually, I really am tired, so that was really nice. You'll feel the soft palate raise up and it'll like arch. And what that is really good for is creating a lot of space within your mouth for the sound to resonate. So when I sing, I picture the sound like a spiraling something. It's going round and round and round and round, and it hits a target. And that helps to focus your tone. But really, you just want to create a lot of space in your mouth. If you're fans of Freddie Mercury, the reason why he has that amazing sound that he has is he had a abnormally high arch in his mouth, and he had a lot of space in there. The reason he never, like, not that it needs to be fixed, but people gave him a really hard time for his buck teeth. The reason why he never got braces or anything like that is it would have changed the sound that he created. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Yes, posture. Okay, so I'm going to do the seated position first, and then I'll show you the other. So when you're sitting down, you want to be seated on the edge of your chair, sort of leant forward, so you have energy in your body. From the, I don't know, I'm sitting on about that much of chair. You don't have to, obviously. It's just, it's a good position to be in. Otherwise, you want to imagine, ooh, you can't see my head. I've cut myself off. Sorry, guys. You want to imagine that you've got a string that goes from the ball of your foot all the way up your legs, up through your torso, up through your head, and right out the top. You want to have tension. So you're leaning forward a little bit on the balls of your feet. Your feet are shoulder width apart, and you're ready to go. Now, if you're wanting to work on singing and you'd like to have really good calves as well, a lot of times singers have these amazing calves, and it's because you always have a lot of tension and you're leaning forward. So choir concerts were something else, because I'd sing for hours, and by the end of the time, my calves would just be on fire. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Most important is breathing. That does tie into posture. That's why we covered both first. If you're slumped over, your diaphragm just doesn't have the good space to be able to do everything that it needs to. And breathing is how you make sure you hit all of your notes. If you have good breath support, 99% of the time you're going to be able to hit those notes. Not always, but often. So you find your rib, your last rib again, and then slide your hand over. So it's right here. It's basically just a few inches above your belly button. But having that good breath is what supports those big notes. There are some really specific ways that you can strengthen that muscle. It's a muscle just like everything else. Also, just so is your soft palate. It's a muscle that needs to be exercised. So something that I would do is I would have, like, ideally I would have 2 weights in my hands to be able to show you, but you just sing with your arms down holding those weights, and it kind of just trains your shoulders to know they're not part of this party, they're not invited, and you can start working more with your stomach. Or you can lay on the ground, and I know this sounds a little bit nuts, but you lay on the ground with some textbooks, some heavy textbooks on your stomach, and you can see them rising and falling, and that helps to build your diaphragm. It's just the very most important thing to work on. Next slide, please. Right, so everybody come off mute, please. This is the bit that I'm really excited about. I probably should have created a slide that had like the words of what we're going to do on there. But we're going to work first on just some ahs. We're going to do a scale together. So we're going to start with ah. Okay, we're going to go down. We're not going to go up. So you know it's early, so I get you. Ah. Okay, so I think I hear possibly JJ doing that. I don't hear very many people off of mute, and you're going to embarrass me because I'm about to make you do some really.
Be warned, we run an echo risk if everybody's off mute doing this together.
You know what? When we're back together, this is going to be so much fun to do again. Okay, so we're going to do one called Diction is Done with the Tip of the Tongue and the Teeth and the Lips and Palate. I don't expect you all to get all the words because I didn't put it on a slide like I should have. So that's me. So you say, diction is done with the tip of the tongue and the teeth and the lips and palate. Okay, so although it's a little snappier, I did that a bit slower, but it really helps remind you where everything is. How about we do, okay, this is a silly one. It's called Siren. So you can start anywhere. You just want to try to find the lowest spot in your voice, go all the way up, touch the bit of your voice, come back down. So it's going to sound weird, but it's fun. So. If you do no other warm-up but that one, you're golden because it gets all the different bits. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Oh yeah, we're gonna do the most annoying sound in the world now because I can since I'm leading, so it's fun. So I don't know if you've ever noticed the difference in the way that opera sounds versus pop sounds versus Broadway. Opera singers tend to sing from sort of further back in their mouth. Broadway seems to be a bit more pulled forward, and pop is really nasal. So I don't know if you've noticed that sort of sound the next time you're listening to music. Listen for that. It's because you can actually direct where the sound hits in your mouth. But since most of us are going to be singing pop and sort of folk, if you sing the most annoying sound in the world, it will focus it exactly where it should be. The sound will resonate in that area. So a lot of times pop is right here. Okay, so the most annoying sound, I'm going to make it first, and then I want you guys to do it after me. It's great. Okay, your tongue is pushed forward. And that'll get it. Oh, today is so good. Thank you so much for doing this with me. That'll focus your sound exactly where you need to. The last slide, please. The most important thing to remember is that singing is supposed to first come from passion. If it makes you happy, do it. You don't have to be the best singer in the world to sing. If you love to sing, just find somewhere to do it. You can sing around the house. But I love giving lessons because it's something that I'm really passionate about, and I love to share my love for music. So I know that we have some birthdays today. Whose birthday was it that was mentioned earlier today?
It's Nikki's mom's birthday, but not till.
Okay, and then it's also Benjamin's birthday. So I thought we could just sing happy birthday. And in place of, their names, we'll just say, I don't know, something else, you all. Dear Oasins, we'll do that. Okay, so let's all sing happy birthday together. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Oasis. Happy birthday to you. It's amazing. I heard everyone at different times. So that was really interesting. Anyway, I'm glad that you guys played along. It would have been really sort of sad if no one did this with me. So anyway, I had a lot of fun. I hope that you guys did. I hope it wasn't boring. I was going to get into some weeds and tell you all about opera, and I thought no one would appreciate that. So I just sort of skipped over it. Anyway, I hope it was a lot of fun, and I hope that you practice some of those things at home. Just knowing where your diaphragm is, having good posture, that'll... Oh, it's also Maddie... Oh, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, and I'll butcher it if I say it. Happy birthday. Anyway, that's it.
My cat got real confused with me making the most annoying sound in the world. That was not a sound that he has ever heard before, and he was like, I don't know what's happening. This is Bilby. So we're gonna put the baby down. Okay, thank you so much, Jocelyn. And this is just a reminder to everyone that if there's something that you would like to share with us, Mark Dixon does our scheduling for community moments, and we would like cat hair in there. We would like to hear from you and hear what you have to share. So please reach out to Mark Dixon. I think scheduling is, I want to say maybe late February, but into March, so you would have some time to think over what you'd like to talk about with us. And with that, we will go into our breakout rooms and take a little time to chat with some people in our community. You'll be in a room of about, I don't know, eight or nine maybe, and just catch up and see how everybody. We'll be back here all together in about 10 minutes. So we'll see you then. Maybe. There we go. See you in a little bit.
I was just gonna leave you spotlighted.
I was like, you can go ahead and not do that anytime now. Okay.
It won't let you leave. I unspotlighted you, but I don't know why it's still.
Oh no, I see the Kansas City Oasis tile.
Okay.
Maybe just because you're you. I mean, you're you. I'm gonna jump in a room here real quick.
What up, Oasis?
How about them Chiefs?
Chiefs are odds-on favorites by a 3-point margin.
Yes, they are.
Unmuted there. Sorry about that. As you might have imagined, I was busy talking in the breakout room. I know it's hard to imagine that that would happen. Hee hee. So hopefully everybody got to have a good chat. Talk about the weather. I don't know. Talk about some football maybe. Hopefully just talk about how you're doing, how you're feeling, how things are going for you here with our extended stay-at-home part of the year. And we're going to go ahead now and get back in touch with Amber. There you are, Amber. I'm going to ask you a couple questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
I've been asking some of our musical guests. What was your some of the earliest influences you can remember, you think, that sort of impacted how you feel about music and how you play music?
Oh, let's see. I started playing percussion when I was in like 5th grade, and I was obsessed with drumming on pretty much everything. So I think that's what started my musical career. But then there was like a guitar laying around in the house from my older sister who played. That only had like 4 strings on it. And I would play that for hours, not knowing what I was doing, until I came across YouTube. And I started teaching myself to play on YouTube.
That's awesome.
Spend like 3 hours a day, every day in my room when I was a kid, like, well, 14. And then I made my parents buy me a guitar for Christmas one year.
With enough strings? I'm sure you got more strings before that.
Oh,
but,
well, yeah. That and it still has 4 strings.
Aw.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have to hang on to that.
Oh,
and so
yeah.
Thinking back, like what kinds of music did you listen to as a kid, and did that have any impact on sort of your style and what you like?
Yeah. Oh, my dad was super into classic rock, and he would on the radio station. So I think that really influenced me to play more of like soulful kind of classic rock music. But my mom would only listen to the pop radio station. So then I think I got a blend of both of my parents' music, and I think that's kind of where I started writing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And again, I just want to plug real quick. So we got I think we had the link wrong on our initial event page, but it's Amber Lynn Martin. You clarified for us, Amber Lynn Martin Music on Facebook.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So check that out, everybody.
Yeah.
And one more question. There's always one more. Talk to us a little bit about your upcoming album.
Okay, so I've been writing songs since I was about 18, and I never recorded anything within the last 10 years. So these songs on the album have been dear to me, and it's been a long time coming. So they're pretty much songs about traveling, songs about breakups or great relationships that have passed, but that's pretty much all it entails. But it should be out in the next month or so.
Oh, exciting. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we will we'll put the correct link in our private page, and people can keep track of you. Sorry about that. Keep track of you and be on the lookout for that album release. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to you. Thank you, Amber. All
right. Thank you so much. All right. Let me just make sure I'm still in tune here. Yeah, this song I wrote is called Jet Plane. It's kind of like a traveling song. I think we're out of tune. I'm leaving on a jet plane. I'm not going far. You can try to reach me. Won't be very hard. And I take you by the hand, babe. Follow you into the sun. Or we can go to the ocean. Maybe I'll try and run. I wasn't ready for the fight. I was scared of what just might happen if I was wrong. Kinda knew all along you were never right for me. I was just your sheep, babe. I was just your sheep. 'Cause I'm leaving on a jet plane. I'm not going far. You can try to reach me. Won't be very hard. And I take you by the hand, babe. Follow you into the sun. Or we can go to the ocean. Maybe I'll try and run. I wasn't ready for the flight. I was scared of what just might happen if I was wrong. I kinda knew all along you were never right for me. I was just your sheep, babe. I was just your sheep. Cause I'm leaving on a jet plane. I'm not going far. You can try to reach me. Won't be very hard. And I take you by the hand, babe. Follow you into the sun. Or we can go to the ocean. Maybe I'll try and run. I wasn't ready for the flight. I was scared of what just might happen if I was wrong. Kinda knew all along you were never right for me. I was just your sheep, babe. I was just your sheep. Cause I'm leaving on a jet plane. I'm not going far. You can try to reach me. Won't be very hard. Yes, that song will be on so much.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I know it's not. There's never any applause on these things except one pair of hands clapping, unfortunately.
Thank
So that's
you.
going to be. You're saying that's going to be on your new album?
Yeah, that song will be on the album.
Wonderful.
Well as Honey Eyes, the one I played before that. Well.
Okay. Okay. Great. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful music. Thank you so much. It's just sort of like a hug, a musical hug. Thank you very much. It's the kind of thing I needed today, so I appreciate it. And we'll get to hear from you again at the end of our program, so that is going to be great. Okay, and so with that now, it is my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker. We're going to talk a little bit about first the organization that Kelsey is with, MOCSA. So MOCSA's sexual assault presentation offers, easy for me to say, participants an opportunity to learn about sexual abuse and assault dynamics and how to respond to disclosures of sexual assault. Using conversations, examples, and statistics, participants will leave with an overview of sexual abuse and assault. We will learn about the basics, including definitions of sexual assault and rape, laws of consent for Kansas and Missouri, the basic needs of survivors and how to support them, how to respond to disclosures using a trauma-informed approach. And today, we are so thrilled to have with us what I like to call returning champion, Kelsey Saragnese. Did I get it? Okay.
Yes.
I've been scared the whole time. I would have butchered it after she told me.
No worries.
Kelsey, I would like to introduce her. She is MOCSA's coordinator of prevention, works a lot with middle and high school students and community groups like ours. Also, we learned that she has a new rescue kitten named Armando. And in Breakout, we learned that he's the same breed as my little buddy, Bilby,
Small world.
Snowshoe. Yeah, Snowshoe Kitty. Kelsey's also goes as a UMKC student in the master's program for social work. And she, like me, is also ready for spring. So with that, let's please give a warm Oasis welcome to Kelsey.
Thank you so much, folks. I'm so happy to be here. The last time I was with you all, the last time I was with Oasis, we were in person, which was really nice. So I'm glad that the pandemic isn't keeping us apart. So I'm very happy to be with you all today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have some slides that I'm going to share just to kind of give us a good visual aid to kind of keep me on track. And if folks are interested, if slides and notes are your thing, let me know and I can get those to you after today as well. Let me see. I'm having a hard time finding my chat box. But I definitely want everyone to feel like they can ask questions. Let me see, where is my chat?
I can, Kelsey, I can kind of field those for you if you don't mind. And,
Perfect.
And usually we save them to the end if that's fine, or if you'd rather
that
have
is
them in real time. Okay.
Either way is totally fine. If you have a burning question about whatever the topic is that we're talking about at the time, feel free to pop that in the chat. Feel free to save your questions for after, whatever feels best for you. Because I have my screen on full screen, I think, and because we're live streaming, I can't see my chat box right now. If you do have something that you want to talk about after the presentation, feel free to send me a private chat on there. But I probably won't see it until I close my screen share, but feel free to do that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, Julie, for that wonderful introduction. So, for folks who may be familiar with MOCSA, this may be your first time interacting with MOCSA. Either way, I'll just give you a quick overview of the organization. So MOCSA stands for the Metropolitan Organization to Counter Sexual Assault. And at MOCSA, our mission is to improve the lives of survivors of sexual assault and abuse and prevent sexual violence in our community. So you'll notice on pretty much every slide, there is a phone number listed at the bottom. It says to access no-cost services, please call 816-531-0233. That is MOCSA's 24-hour support line. So if people have questions, concerns, if they're looking for resources for others, or want to get connected to MOCSA services for themselves, that's our 24-hour support line. You can always call that number, even if it's just to check in to process what's going on. So at MOCSA, we serve the entire KC metro area in Missouri and in Kansas. So in Missouri, we're able to serve folks who live in Jackson, Clay, Platte, and Cass County, and in Kansas, in Wyandotte and Johnson County. If you have someone who's dealing with a situation that has to do with sexual assault, abuse, or harassment, and they live outside of this service area, they can absolutely still call MOCSA. Depending on what they're looking for, we may or may not be able to provide them that assistance, but we can absolutely get them connected to another agency that's closer to where they live if that's the case. And at MOCSA, we do a few different things. All of our services are provided at no cost to community members. So we do have counseling and therapy services for anyone age 5 and up. So we are able to see both youth and adults at our counseling program. Right now, because of the pandemic, pretty much all of our counseling is happening virtually on a secure video conference platform called Advocacy. So folks still are able to meet with their counselors. Like everything else right now, it looks a little bit different, but we're really glad to still be able to offer that as an option. We also have an amazing advocacy team that has a number of people who provide direct support and service to survivors of sexual assault and abuse and their families. So if someone is working with law enforcement systems, with the legal system, if they have to go to court, file paperwork, file an order of protection, file charges, criminal charges with law enforcement, if they go to a hospital to get medical attention after experiencing sexual assault or abuse, any of those situations, our advocates are going to be able to respond, to go through that process with them, to provide them support and resources, as well as things like if the abuse or assault that the person experienced is impacting their work or their education, or is a reason that they no longer have access to a safe place to live or stay. Advocates can help with all of those issues. And we do have an advocate who specifically works with Title IX cases, which is anyone who is a student, whether K through 12 or in higher ed. So if someone is a student, they experience assault or abuse that was perpetrated by someone who is affiliated with their institution, whether it's another student, a teacher, a staff member, something like that. There are specific laws and regulations that exist to support people in those situations. All right. And lastly, our education programs, those are also completely free of charge. That's the department that I work in. We do a lot of different things in education. We do a lot of education and prevention programming with youth in pre-K through 12 school settings. We also work with a lot of the colleges and universities and higher ed institutions around Kansas City area. And then we are really fortunate to get to work with really great community groups like you all. So we have the opportunity to meet a lot of folks in the community who are really passionate about these issues and make sure that they have the resources to share with the people in their lives as well. So if there are other groups that you're affiliated with, if this is something that, if your job, you interact with clients or patients or folks and you think this would be useful training for your colleagues, feel free to reach out and we can absolutely get that set up for any of those other communities that you're a part of too. And as part of our advocacy department, MOCSA is really fortunate to have a program called Legal Advocacy for Victims. We do have an attorney and a paralegal on staff who are able to provide all of these resources. So legal support for student victims through Title IX, orders of protection, which a lot of folks also will call a restraining order, visas for immigrant survivors, custody issues, victims' rights issues like crime victims compensation, as well as housing related issues. So again, those are available free of charge. Due to jurisdictional things and case capacity, our attorney isn't able to provide full legal services for everyone in the metro who is dealing with one of these things. But if they can't serve someone's needs, they can absolutely get them connected to another resource that can. Okay, so that's a really brief introduction of the organization. And I wanted to pause before we get into some of the nitty-gritty details, just to let everyone know that because of the nature of this conversation, we will be talking about some topics that can feel really heavy or personal or sometimes overwhelming. And so if at any point you need to take a break or a step back That is totally fine. If we get to a point where you're like, "Ooh, this is a lot. I think I'm going to be done for the day," that is totally understandable. I'm also going to share my contact information, and I know Julie and Nikki also have my contact information and my colleagues' contact information. So if you need to take a break and you need to reach out later, that is totally fine and understandable too. And that crisis line number at the bottom here at the bottom of this page, if that's somebody that you want to give a call while you're taking your break, feel free. We have really amazing staff and volunteers on over the weekends who are always there for support. Okay. So we're going to start by just kind of establishing some definitions, right? These are a lot of terminology that you might hear folks using, sometimes interchangeably. You're going to hear me use the phrase sexual assault the most, not just because it's in the name of the place that I work, but because it's sort of an umbrella term. So sexual assault refers to any sexual activity without consent. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about consent and what that looks like, what that means. But in general, if we're talking about any sexual activity without consent, that kind of exists on a spectrum, right? So there are things that people might consider to be less severe or more socially acceptable, right? And that could be like sexual harassment, making inappropriate comments to someone, like sexual comments coming onto someone, trying to touch someone, all the way, sort of on the other end of the spectrum to be like unwanted physical sexual contact, up to and including rape. And so when we use that term sexual assault, it refers to a number of different experiences. A lot of legal terminology you'll see using words, they'll use words like rape or sexual battery, things like that. So at MOCSA, we are not a state agency, we're not a law enforcement agency, so we understand that in this category is pretty broad. There are lots of experiences that fit under there. All of those experiences are valid. All of those experiences can be traumatic for folks who experience them. And I have no obligation to prove or find evidence to, suggest that someone is telling or not telling the truth. So that is to say that I don't have the same kind of obligation that, a police officer, a detective, or a prosecutor does, where we have to find physical evidence, things like that. If someone tells me that they've been sexually assaulted, it is my responsibility to hear them, to believe them, and to move forward and make sure that they have what they need. So we already used consent in the definition to talk about sexual assault, so probably help to establish what exactly consent means. And this is probably a term that a lot of folks are familiar with. I feel like this is a term, especially in the last 10 years, we've been hearing a lot more. You might have also heard people use the phrase like affirmative consent. And so we're going to kind of talk about how that is a part of sort of, again, the umbrella of consent. So in general, consent is a free and enthusiastic yes. And so that could be for any kind of physical contact or relationship. Specifically, we're usually talking about sexual contact or sexual activity for the purposes of this conversation, but, consent is not limited to sexual contact or sexual activity. Consent can be, asking someone before you give them a hug. It could be a lot of different things. So if consent is free, it means that there's no force, fear, or coercion that's present in the situation, right? No one is being pressured. No one is being intimidated. No one feels like if they say no or they say the wrong thing, that there will be some kind of negative consequence that will happen to them. They are free to make a decision. Enthusiastic doesn't necessarily have to mean, like spirited, jumping up and down, pom-poms, the whole thing. Enthusiastic is more about active participation and making a decision because you want to make it, right? We are human beings. We have a lot of relationships, and there are a lot of times when someone will ask us to do something and we say yes, not very enthusiastically, because we know that it has to get done, right? Like taking out the trash or driving someone to the airport, whatever it is. It might not be our favorite thing to do. And so we definitely know the difference between making an enthusiastic decision because that's something that matters to us, that's something that we're on board with, versus doing something that we feel obligated to do. And then lastly, when we're talking about yes, that means that it's clearly verbal and nonverbal, right? So when I talk with young people, we do a lot of like, okay, what would my body language look like if I was excited about something? What would my body language look like if I was not interested? And we talk about physical boundaries and how to kind of tell, right? A lot of times you can tell from someone's facial expressions, right? You can tell from the tone of their voice. You can tell from the way that they are turning or not turning, closing off or open. There's a lot of body language in this kind of communication. And some folks have probably heard the expression or the statistic that 80 or 90% of our communication is body language, which is pretty wild, especially I feel like for me, because I'm talking all the time. I'm like, gosh, that's only 10% of my communication is the words that I'm actually saying. And the tricky thing about Zoom is that we can't necessarily see everyone's body language, right? Or even if you're wearing a mask, it can be hard to see someone's facial expression. So we also have to be comfortable with the verbal stuff too. We have to be able to say, is this something that's okay? Do you want to do this? Do you not want to do this? Do you want me to stop? Do you want me to keep going? So there has to be both of those components involved because not all the time our body language is 100% clear, and not all the time our words are 100% clear. We've probably all said yes or maybe or sure to something that we didn't really want to do. And so it's the person that we're with, it's their responsibility to make sure that they understand what we're communicating and vice versa. So consent is also mutual, right? There has to be a clear understanding on everyone involved on what is okay, what are our limits, what are our boundaries, what are we doing, when are we doing it, how, all of those things. And, when you dig into it like that, it can feel really complicated, but it is really simple, right? It's a free and enthusiastic yes. And we're going to talk about some of the things that might become barriers or obstacles to folks' consent, including some of those legal things. So in general, when we're talking about free and enthusiastic consent, there are going to be a few situations where somebody is not going to be able to give that consent, either because of something that is happening to them, something that's happening in the environment, or something that's happening in the relationship. So this one is one I already mentioned, right? But if someone is being threatened, if someone is being scared, someone is being forced, whether that's physical force or psychological manipulation or coercion, that is not a situation where someone feels free to give their consent. If they feel like they have to say no, or if they feel like they have to say yes, then that no isn't really there. There's no other option. If someone is being blackmailed or coerced, again, no consent. If there's an if then in the situation, if you don't do this, then I'll do this. If you don't, when I'm talking with young people, a lot of times it's, if you don't, sleep with me, then I'll break up with you. If you don't do this, then I'll show everyone those photos that you sent me, things like that. And so we know that that doesn't just impact young people, that shows up in all sorts of relationships. And so it's important that there aren't strings attached to our consent. If someone is unconscious or asleep or passed out, they are not able to give their consent. That one should be pretty simple, but unfortunately we know that there are a lot of people who are victimized when they are not conscious and not able to give their consent. So silence is not consent. The lack of a no does not equal a yes. And so it's really important to remember that if someone is not able to give their consent because they're incapacitated, because they're intoxicated, or for some other reason, that is not an automatic yes. So when people talk about affirmative consent, they kind of frame it instead of, no means no, something that a lot of us have heard for a long time. Affirmative consent kind of turns it on its head and says yes means yes, right? And anything that's not yes doesn't mean yes. Okay, unconscious and asleep. Oh, imbalance of power. This is such a huge one. And if you have been watching the news anytime over the past 5 or so years, you've probably seen a lot of these stories coming up. We've even been hearing stuff locally, nationally, in our own communities, right? All sorts of things. So imbalance of power in a relationship occurs when there's a person who has more power and authority than another. And when that person is using that power or authority to try to force or pressure someone into a sexual relationship, to provide sexual favors, to show them photos of their body, whatever the situation is, right? Then that is not a situation where that other person with less power or authority is able to give their consent. So if we think about it if we think about, for example, like a supervisor and an employee, right? Or a manager and an employee, there's a person in that relationship who has more power and authority automatically. And whether or not that person, that manager, explicitly tells their employee, if you don't do this, you're fired. If you don't do this, we're gonna cut your hours, or we're gonna, I'm gonna move your desk into the storage room, or whatever it is, XYZ. Whether or not they're explicitly saying that imbalance of power sends a message, right? Whether that person is saying that or not, we know that shows up in that relationship. And I've had conversations with folks who have been in situations like this, before they get to a place where there is abuse, where there is harassment, where there's any of those things. The person who's interested in a relationship with a superior in their workplace, and the thing that I always come back to is, if it comes down to it, who is going to stay and who has to leave, right? And 9 times out of 10, it's the manager that stays, and the person below them, kind of in the hierarchy, that is seen as more disposable, which is really hard. Imbalance of power doesn't have to just be in the workplace. It can also show up in other environments. So that could be in any kind of group or organization where someone has status or authority. It might not be explicit status. You're the CEO, or you're the manager. It could be you're the person that everyone in this community looks up toward. You've been here for a really long time, and you're very highly respected, and people think very highly of you. And so there is again that implicit status that's there, whether it's social status, financial status, kind of community status, that might only show up in that environment, and maybe doesn't translate in others. Maybe that person doesn't have the same authority in their workplace or in another community setting. But within that environment, if there is an imbalance of power, that is, that can be a recipe for exploitation. Okay. All right. So the last two, this is where some of the legal stuff comes in. So under the age of consent, if a person is under the age of consent, they're legally not able to give their consent for sexual activity. And this feels kind of complicated because every time I talk to young people, they're like, oh, so does that mean you go to jail if you're under the age of consent and you have sex? And the answer to that is almost always no. But if there's a situation where there's a person who's over the age of consent, who is using that imbalance of power, right? That age difference, if they're using power and authority, if they're using any of these other tools in order to exploit or pressure or coerce the younger person, then that's absolutely going to be a situation where that younger person is not able to give their consent. So in the state of Missouri, the age of consent is 17. In Kansas, it's 16. Every state sets its own age of consent. It's not like the drinking age or the voting age where it's the same in every state. So it's important to know that. I spend a lot of time talking with high school students, and I tell them this is really important stuff for you guys to know, right? Because the state line is very porous, right? We go back and forth all the time. It doesn't matter what side you live on, what side you work on, right? You're probably spending some time on both sides of the state line, and you probably have relationships with people who are on both sides of the state line. And so it's important to understand what those legal ramifications look like. Typically, if there are two people who are under the age of consent, in Missouri it's 17, so if there are two people who are 16 and they are dating and they have a safe, equal, healthy relationship where they're sexually active, it's very likely that no one is going to get in trouble, right? If one of those people has a birthday and turns 17 and the other person is still 16, it's pretty likely that nobody's going to get in trouble. Typically, if there's something else going on, right? If there is abuse, if there's coercion, if there's manipulation or fear, any of those things, that's going to be a situation where that opens it up to either child abuse, to statutory rape, to something like that. The tricky thing is that it's hard, broadly to say what happened, because a lot of the time that is at the discretion of the prosecutor to decide whether or not they're going to move forward with that stuff. And a lot of the time that's based on those things that I was talking about earlier, right? If they have hard evidence, which sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And the last one is if someone is under the influence, and that's pretty broad. If someone's under the influence of alcohol or any kind of mind-altering substances, legally, they're not able to give their consent. In the state of Missouri, we have a law in the books that says that if someone has had more than one drink, they're not able to give their consent. That does not mean that if you have a beer and have sex with another person who's had a beer, doesn't mean that there is automatically abuse or sexual assault that's happening. It means that a law was created to protect people who were taken advantage of when they were in a vulnerable state and when they were under the influence, to protect them and make sure that they have legal recourse to be safe and to seek justice in some way after that happens. So that can feel like a tricky situation for folks. A lot of the time people will say, well, what if both people are drinking? Or what if both people are high? Or what if both people, what if this person's had this many drinks and this person's had this many drinks? And we know that everybody's body is different, right? Everybody handles alcohol or substances in their body differently, different tolerance, different experience level. Typically, I think a good rule of thumb is that if someone is too drunk to drive, they're probably too drunk to consciously give their consent. And granted, if someone is in a relationship where that's something that they feel comfortable with, that's a different story versus if someone is meeting somebody at the bar for the first time, right? And that's also a conversation to have with that other person, with anyone else that you're with. Different people have different boundaries. And I know we're a group of adults, and so hopefully we're good at navigating those boundaries. But those are, I think, important things to know. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, cool. Okay, so this question always comes up, especially once we start talking about intoxication and mind-altering substances and things like that. And so something that people are typically really curious about is what we used to call date rape drugs, right? And now we're moving toward this language of calling something drug-facilitated sexual assault. So I'm curious, what would you, if you had to guess, what would you say the number one drug used to facilitate abuse or assault would be? And feel free to unmute your mic. You can type it in the chat. I can't see the chat right now.
Okay, yeah, no, I'll read it to you. So
okay.
I JJ and I both said alcohol. David said GHB.
Mm-hmm.
The responses so far.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for reading those out, Julie. Absolutely.
I think that's all the guesses. Oh, Molly. Somebody says Molly.
Okay. Those are good guesses. Thank you, guys. Like I said, I spent a lot of time doing education with teenagers, and sometimes I'm like, I have to Google the thing that they just wrote because now I feel old. But they have a lot of wild suggestions. And actually, you guys hit the nail right on the head. Typically, alcohol is the most commonly used drug. Sometimes people are like, that's a trick question. We don't really think about alcohol as being a drug in the same way as we think about other hard drugs. So sorry if it's a trick question. But in general, alcohol is very frequently used as a tool for abuse, exploitation, and assault, things like that. For a lot of reasons, right? Alcohol is easily accessible. It is legal to purchase. And I always, when I'm talking to young people, I say this and I'm like, you guys may not know this. I'm sorry if I'm the messenger. Sometimes even people who are under 21 can get alcohol and they pretend to be shocked. But we know that it's an accessible thing, right? It doesn't look very suspicious. Definitely not as much as a little baggie of powder or pills or something that someone tries to put into someone else's drink. So people voluntarily consume alcohol, especially at in social situations. So it's not something that usually has to be forced on someone. And a lot of the time we actually think it's really nice. Oh my gosh, that person bought me a drink, or that person, refilled my drink, or whatever it is. That's so nice of them. And not that someone buying you a drink automatically means that they have any kind of nefarious intent, because it doesn't. But if there's someone who is targeting someone, that is a common tool in those environments that they will use at a bar, at a party, something like that. We all know most of these things, right? Alcohol impairs our judgment. That's why we don't let people drive or get tattoos when they're drunk. It makes them harder. There's a lot of things that it changes in our body, like our reaction time. We get a little wobbly, right? We're a lot less sturdy on our feet. So there's a lot of vulnerability that's created. And the last one is really hard, right? There is this really unfortunate double standard that we see so often when there's alcohol involved in the sexual assault situation, where folks who are not involved in the situation often see that as a reason to discredit the person who was victimized. And at the same way, to kind of let the person off the hook who perpetrated that violence. And say, well, they were drunk. They didn't really know what they were doing. And then on the flip side saying, well, that person was drunk. What were they expecting to happen? So there's a lot of really unfortunate victim blaming that happens in those situations, that alcohol kind of exacerbates that. And sometimes perpetrators depend on that. They depend on that, lack of clarity to kind of help them get off the hook. Okay, so I just saw the time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit because I could talk about this forever and ever, but I want to make sure that we are getting folks' questions answered. So there are a lot of statistics. I'm not going to read through all of them. The thing to take away, also this last one is a little out of date, so I need to update that, sorry. The thing to take away from this is that all of us have someone in our lives, whether we know it or not, who's been impacted by sexual violence, people of all genders. A lot of the time, we think that this is something that happens to women, or that only happens to women, or that only men do to women. And that is unfortunately, well, nothing is fortunate about this, but that is not the whole story. We know that there are lots of reasons why people of all genders don't talk about, don't disclose, or don't report what happened to them. And oftentimes that can be compounded by a lot of these factors that we've talked about, right? A lot of stereotyping about who's a victim and who's not a victim, and who's a perpetrator and who's not a perpetrator. And that does absolutely a major disservice to every survivor when that becomes the story. So, okay. One last statistic I'm going to use is that the majority of sexual assaults that occur, at least that are reported, right? Because again, all of these numbers are based on reports, and sexual assault is a very underreported crime. So take a lot of these numbers with a grain of salt, right? My guess is that these are much lower than they actually are for that reason. The majority of sexual assaults are committed by someone known to that person, right? Whether it's a partner, a former partner, a friend, an acquaintance, something like that, a person that they have a relationship with, because a lot of the time those are situations in which we kind of have our guard down, right? Because we trust someone. And we've all probably been in a situation to some extent or another where we've trusted a person who wasn't trustworthy and who didn't deserve our trust. And that is never our fault. Right? If someone uses our trust and our relationship to do something harmful, to do something that they know is not okay, to do something that they know is wrong, that is absolutely never that person's fault. It is always the fault of the person who made that choice. Okay. I am going to send these to you guys later because I do want to talk about the neurobiology of trauma. I think it's important to know how people respond. But I also want to talk about what we should do if someone that we know and care about comes to us and tells us that they've experienced sexual assault, because that's very important. And like I said, it's probably pretty likely that most of us will have that experience at some point in our lives if we haven't already. So after someone experiences trauma, there's no one reaction that's right. There's no one way to do things. A lot of the time, people get written off because they don't react the right way, right? We think if they're not hysterical crying, then nothing bad must have happened, but that's not how our brains work. For some of us, that is how our brains work. For some of us, we kind of freeze and shut down, and that's actually a really, really common trauma response. The majority of people kind of have that response where they kind of pull back in pull back inward and try to compartmentalize and feel frozen until they feel safe to process those emotions. So there's no such thing as a perfect victim, right? And so what we need to know is that there's no checklist of things that we need to look for. It's really important that we're meeting people where they're at, wherever they're at in their healing process. That is the best thing that we can do. If we are, I'm gonna skip. These are really important. Okay, so if you're a person who is a friend or a loved one of someone who has experienced sexual assault or abuse and they share this with you, there are a few really simple, right? Simple, but not always easy things that we can do. So the most important thing is to listen non-judgmentally, oh my God, and it's the opposite, non-judgmentally, right? Without judgment, without interrogation, without questioning. Even if we have questions, humans are naturally curious people. And when someone that we know and care about is hurt, we often want to know everything. We want to know, why did this happen? And are you okay? And where was this? And what time? And all these things. But a lot of time that can feel to that person like they're being questioned and put under a microscope, that we don't believe them. So hold on to those questions and kind of put those in your pocket, because there's a time and a place for all of those things. So actively listening, right? Letting them know that you believe them. There is research that shows that the first person that someone discloses to has a huge impact on whether that person will go on to seek support in the future. So if someone discloses their experience to a person who doesn't believe them, who blames them, who shuts them down, it's highly likely that that person will not go on to seek out further resources like counseling and support, and that they're also more likely to experience PTSD symptoms and more extreme symptoms. So let them know that you are there in whatever capacity you're able to be. This can also be hard, right? Because a lot of us are also trauma survivors. And if we are carrying our own trauma and want to be there for someone else, that can feel really challenging sometimes. And so it's important to kind of know what some of your boundaries are and say, I'm here for you. I care about you. I want to go through this with you. I want to be here for you. And there are probably some things that are going to be really hard for me, right? And so there's a way to do that without centering your own experience in that process. Mirror the language that that person uses. If someone says, this happened to me, and they don't say, I was sexually assaulted, please don't say you were sexually assaulted, right? There's a lot of reasons why people do or don't label their experiences with certain labels. And it's always going to be that survivor's right to describe and label their experience the way that they want, right? And unless you are like a detective or a prosecutor or whatever, it's not our job to use that terminology unless that person feels okay with it. Okay, again, validating feelings, letting people know that there's no wrong way to respond, and they might feel like they're going nuts, and that might be a totally normal response, right? When we experience trauma, that is something that overwhelms our system. And so any kind of response to that is going to be normal because we're responding to an abnormal situation. Okay, asking open-ended questions, that's like, what can I do for you? How would you like me to show up for you? Right? And making sure that that person has the ability to make choices and decisions about what happens next, because they were in a situation where that power and control was taken away. And the first thing that we want to do is make sure that they have as much autonomy in their decision-making process as possible moving forward. So sometimes it can be helpful to just kind of have things in your back pocket if you know someone is dealing with something really hard. Right? Grounding them and letting them know that it is not their fault, that you believe them, that they're not alone, that you're on their team, right? That there are resources for them if they choose, if they're interested in using those, and that you support the decisions that they're going to make. We don't want to ever be in a situation where we're taking over the process and making decisions for someone else without their permission. If someone says, you know what, I don't want to, I'm done with X, Y, and Z. Can you take care of that for me? That's one thing. Then saying, you know what, you seem really overwhelmed. Why don't you just let me figure this out for you? Those are two totally different approaches, and we want to make sure that that person has the decision-making power. Okay, this is a great video about empathy from Brene Brown that I will be sure to share with you guys later. So let me see. Okay, so this is something that I like to talk about a lot in terms of before violence is happening, you know, opportunities to intervene as a bystander. You don't have to have all of the skills, you don't have to have all of the knowledge and all the answers, but there's a lot of things that each of us can do as a friend, as a community member, to make sure that people are safe, right? So if you notice something seems off, if you notice someone's boundaries are getting violated, if you notice that they seem really uncomfortable or isolated or in an unsafe situation, there are always options to do something to help. You can be really direct. You can go right up to them and say something or take that person away. You can get other people involved and say, hey, does that look weird to you too? I think we should go say something. Or you can kind of change the subject, right? You can make a distraction. You can say, oh, hey, can you show me where the bathroom is? Just to get that person out of the situation, right? That's a place to use some creativity and to make sure that, you know, whatever we're doing, I just want to make sure this person is safe, right? And I don't have to go in like a superhero. There's a lot of things that I can do to make sure that they're out of an unsafe situation. And then afterward, making sure that that person is okay and that they have what they need, because that's going to be really overwhelming. Okay. At MOCSA, we talk a lot about culture change, and that's a really big topic, and I'm at my time. So I'm not going to dive super deep into what that looks like right now. But overall, if we want to change the culture that we live in, which in a lot of ways supports violence and perpetuates violence, there are things that we can do, right? Calling out when we see unhealthy norms and behaviors happening, right? Whether that's in media, whether that's in people around us, whether that's in organizations that or institutions that we're a part of, and then replacing them, rebuilding and reinforcing healthy norms, right? Norms that center the needs of our most vulnerable folks, right? And that includes survivors. That is how we change our culture to one that values people's safety and autonomy versus one that condones and encourages and perpetuates violence. So that was a ton of information that I dumped on you all in not a whole lot of time. So that's why I'm 100% going to share this information with you afterwards so that you can keep this however you want to look at it again later. Or if you never want to look at it again too, that's totally fine. We all make our own choices, right? So like I was saying, if you are being that support person for someone who has experienced violence, there are many, many options. Sometimes it can feel like, I do not know what to do. Where do we go from here? And that is totally understandable because that's a traumatic situation and experience. But there are absolutely options. So you can call that MOCSA crisis line. That's 24 hours a day, and they can absolutely talk through those options. They can process, they can help you come up with a safety plan, and they can help you decide what you want to do next. And even if you say, hey, this happened to someone that I know and care about, and I want to make sure that I'm giving them what they need. What do you guys offer? What can I talk to them about? That's absolutely a call that you can make too. They can go to any hospital emergency room in the metro, and they will be seen by a specially trained nurse, a sexual assault nurse examiner, who can get them the medical care that they need free of charge, as well as a medical exam, a sexual assault exam, to make sure that they don't have any injuries or anything like that after that assault occurred. And if they do want to make a report to the police, that nurse will also help them collect any physical evidence that's available. If they do want to make a report to the police, a MOCSA advocate can help with that as well. They can do that at the same time if they go to the hospital, or at any point in the future. If they do that sexual assault exam, the hospital will store it at least for 90 days. It depends on the hospital. They all have different policies. If that person decides that they want to make a report later. There's a lot of reasons why people do and don't decide to report, and that's a whole other conversation that we can absolutely have. But that's never something that anyone is required or obligated to do. There are lots of other things that folks can do. You can make a safety plan with the people that you care about. You can collaborate with a MOCSA advocate. if that's part of your safety plan, if you want to get an order of protection, if you need help navigating these issues with work or school or housing or any of those things. There's also, each state has a fund called Crime Victims Compensation that can provide up to $25,000 in reimbursement expenses for medical care, for counseling and psychological care, for property that was destroyed or clothes that were lost or things like that. And so a MOCSA advocate can absolutely help with that too. So, this is for something that's, so we'll come back to that in a second. So that was a ton of information. I'm so sorry. I'm realizing that I went a few minutes over. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close my screen share, and I'm going to type that crisis phone number or the crisis line into
And you
the
said
chat
that
for
you can
folks to use
provide,
as well.
that you'll provide this deck to us to put, we'll put it on our private page.
Absolutely.
So we had, I think we had some questions, but for the most part, I think you covered them very thoroughly. Just a couple comments in regard to that, as far as, yeah, someone made the comment about if I believe that if you haven't received consent from the person when they were sober, you should assume that an inebriated yes is still a no. And you talked a little bit about the nuance for that, and the Missouri statute, which I think is giving us some food for thought, perhaps, especially when engaging with people that we don't already have a personal relationship with. So I think that was really helpful. I have a question about, I mean, how do you feel over time? Do you feel that the law enforcement agencies in our area have become more receptive to the idea of victim advocacy? What do you think the state of affairs is there?
That's a great question. So I would say broadly, yes, things are getting better, right? And especially if we're comparing to how law enforcement agencies approached sexual assault and abuse in the past. They used to do a really not great job, right? And so, and when you're coming from sort of that baseline, any improvement is going to be major. But there are a lot of law enforcement agencies in the metro that have, you know, social workers or victim or survivor advocates that are embedded in the police departments. And so they can work directly with folks to make sure that they have those resources and support. Our bigger law enforcement agencies like Kansas City, Missouri, KCK, Independence, I can't think of all of them off the top of my head, have detectives that are specifically trained to work with and serve survivors of sexual assault and abuse as well. So in some ways, it definitely depends on the jurisdiction. And some of our smaller law enforcement agencies, they just don't have the same level of training and experience. And there aren't always folks who are specialized in those positions. And that can be why it can be really helpful to have an advocate, someone who is more familiar with navigating that process. Because the thing about our legal system and our criminal justice system is that it is complicated. And for a lot of us, we are not usually in the situation where we have to know how it operates and know the ins and outs. And so that can feel really overwhelming too, when especially if we're already dealing with a traumatic experience. So my answer, I guess, is yes and no, unfortunately.
That makes sense. So we appreciate that. The likelihood is, of course, that we will have you back. We try to strive at least yearly to have someone from MOCSA come in. I believe the last time you visited with us, we did it in more of a workshop format, which, you know, likely once we're back in person, that's something that we'll want to explore. It's hard to get through everything and, you know, get everybody's questions answered. And I think an in-person setting lends itself to that maybe a little better than a live stream Zoom call. So, of course, we're excited that you were able to spend this time with us and share this very important information. But we would, yeah, we'll have you back definitely.
Absolutely. I would be happy to. I would be happy to. And so once I close this, I'm kind of scrolling through and seeing the comments and the questions that people shared. And so I just want to say I appreciate everyone's questions. I appreciate that people are thinking and engaging critically with the material. I am looking and just wanting to make sure I didn't miss anything. And I also want to say I know that that this is a really heavy topic to talk about, and for all of us, and for especially for folks who have personal experiences related to violence. And so yeah, and so I'm really grateful that folks share this time and use some of your time on your Sunday morning, afternoon. And I absolutely I'm seeing the notes about like a trigger warning, content warning, and I thank you guys for that feedback. I'm really sorry if that I didn't communicate that effectively at the beginning. So I apologize if there was any triggers that came up. Okay. It's always going to be a triggering conversation, but there are definitely ways to make people feel more comfortable and make people feel more prepared at the beginning. Let's see. Yes. Oh, thank you, Maureen. Yes, the phone number in your phone is great to have, even if you personally don't need it. You never know when someone else will. Let's see.
And we try to make sure, that we keep resources available. Again, if anybody has, this is coming from the board of Oasis. If you experience anything and need our support, we have a community care group that works hard to make sure that our resources are up to date and available to our community. And of course, we'll be pinning this in our announcements in the short term. But we'll always have these resources available if anybody needs to reach out to any of the leadership. So, okay, with that, Kelsey, thank you again so much for sharing this with us. It gives us a lot of food for thought, especially right now while we're all kind of home. Where it gives us some time maybe to process ways we can think about how to use the information regarding consent and support to victims in the future. So thank you so much. And with that, we will turn it back over to Amber. But right before we do that, I'll just remind everyone that Oasis is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're entirely volunteer staffed and donation funded. Our program today is just part of what we've been offering here during the pandemic, a weekly informational, educational, and motivational speaker series, along with a presentation of local musicians. So if this is something that you appreciate and that you are getting some joy from, we would appreciate your donation to help support us. You can visit our website, caseoasis.org, and there's a donate at the top of that homepage. And with that, we will turn it back over to Amber, and she will wrap up with a musical performance today. Thank you.
Okay. So the last song I'm going to be singing is called The Grass is Greener, and this song is also going to be on my upcoming album. It's kind of like a traveling with your friends type of song. So here we go. So the grass is greener on the other side. Well, I beg to differ, 'cause you're on my mind all the time. These times are up. I got my foot, you got my right. Let's walk to the train tonight. We don't need no money, we just need our love to get us by. We just need our friends to get us by. We just need somebody by our side. We'll be passing all the states in Indiana, then we'll wait to get to Colorado. I really don't have any problems there. Oh, I really don't have any problems there. We'll be rolling the windows down, everybody in the backseat now. These are all my best friends, never leaving my side till the very end. Well, I got my ticket, you got yours. Let's fly on a plane or a bus or anything that is emotional, anything that'll get us across the USA. I got my left leg on my right. Let's walk to the train tonight. We don't need no money, we just need our love to get us by. Oh, we just need our friends to get us by. We just need somebody by our side. We'll be passing all the states in Indiana, then LA till we get to Colorado. They don't have any problems there. Oh, they don't have any problems there. I just wanna plant myself somewhere. Oh. I just wanna plant myself somewhere. Thank
Thank you. I feel like the chorus of that could be our theme song. Definitely, we need our friends to get us by through all this, and we appreciate.
Yeah, we just need somebody by our side. Yeah, I wrote that.
Sorry. Okay, we'll just highlight one more time Amber's Facebook music page. You see it there in the chat, but I'll read it out for those on the live stream. It's Amber Lynn Martin Music, so that's on Facebook.
Yes.
And again, we will also, the website for MOCSA is MOCSA.org. So that's pretty straightforward as far as getting in contact with MOCSA. As I wrap up, one thing we'd like to ask for is if anyone would like to take over my job. We're looking for more MCs to join our lineup. If you're interested in participating in our community by volunteering to be an MC, we would love to have you. Also, earlier in the day, and then I think also on our private page, we talked a little bit about JJ's podcast that he's hosting and will be doing so later today. It's called Analyzed, the podcast. Today he'll be discussing philosophy with a friend of his, so that's exciting. You might check out wherever you get your podcasts and take a listen there for JJ's podcast. So it's just up to me now to thank all of our presenters, Amber Martin, Jocelyn Rose, and Kelsey from MOCSA. Everybody stay warm, stay well, keep in touch with your community, reach out if you need us, or just to say hello. And go Chiefs. Happy Super Bowl day, everybody. And we will see you back again this same time. Oh, next week, okay, one more plug. Next week is Mortified Casey Oasis. So we're going to have some local community members, plus a seasoned mortified person sharing some things from their past to see just how bad I wrote poetry in the mid 80s. So hopefully everybody can tune in for that next week. But until then, my name is Julie Samuel Westman. This is Kansas City Oasis. Have a great week.